Hello, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This week's fantastic guest is William Clouston, who is a leader of the SDP, the Social Democratic Party. I met William online probably about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. We were chatting through Twitter and other social media, but we couldn't meet face to face because of COVID. And when the restrictions were lifted, William was in Manchester one day, so we arranged to go for a pint. And then after that, he had a meeting with the Greater Manchester Northwest SDP, and I came along and I met some amazing people, really down to earth, people who knew what they were talking about and people who were putting the country first, which doesn't happen very often now in politics, with people who are saying, I want a better country, not necessarily I want a better life here and now. I'd like to think we became friends. Since then, we've met several times at different events. And then when I started this podcast, I thought, let's get him on because I know he's got a party conference coming up. So there's lots of things we can talk about. So first of all, welcome, William, to the podcast.
Thanks very much for the invitation, Nick. Good to be here.
No, excellent. So I've been on your website, obviously, and within the first half a second, you made me smile, because the first title on your website is For Family. And if there's anything that I support in this country, this world, it's the family, because that's what's been breaking down over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And that's what I've spent the last 20 years trying to help fix. Lack of fathers, lack of family cohesion, and that sort of thing. Well, why is that the first heading on your website?
I think, just as you say, I think it's politics is inclined to deal with symptoms, but not causes. And as you say, the breakdown in the family over the last 40 years, particularly, is the source of so many of our problems. So many social and economic problems go back to that. And yet the political class just won't talk about it. You won't find very many people in the big parties that are prepared to raise it. They ignore it. Events happen and they stock refuse to look at causes. I mean, knife crime is rampant in London at the moment and occurs in the other big cities. But you won't find a politician that raises the issue of absent fatherhood or just family stability generally. It's easier, Nick, to say, well, if we spent a bit more money on youth clubs, then these things wouldn't happen. But they just can't address the fact that in all the data, in all the academic studies you care to look at, all of the outcomes, whether it's mental health or educational attainment or general happiness or delinquency or crime or whatever, any metric you want, family stability will make those things better, and instability will make it worse. So we just think, you need a party to stick up to the family and to develop some family-friendly policies, and that's what we're trying to do. It is an absolute foundation. If the family structure is solid, society is solid.
Absolutely. And I've got 2 decades worth of experience working on the front line and working on the streets to completely agree with everything you've said. One of the stats I came across recently, because I'm writing a book at the moment on feminism, and part of the problem with the destruction of the family is down to feminism as well. And one of the stats I found was 75% of all prisoners come from single parent households, yet only 14% of households are single parent. So how do you work that one out? It's people who are missing, especially a father, but also missing a mum if they're living with the dad. We've been designed to need 2 parents. That's why we have 2 parents. Family, community, extended family can help raise a child, and so they should. But without the nucleus of a mum and a dad, then lots of things can go wrong. So I really like that first thing on your website, made me go, wow, I've not seen a political party say anything like this in my lifetime. So hats off to the SDP for that. So for people who don't know who you are, obviously, quick look on your website, you class yourself as a political party that's economically on the left, but culturally you're a traditional party, as in the family and things like that. Could you just give us 1 or 2 lines on what that means?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the left-wing side, I mean, we're historically an offshoot of the Labour Party. 4 very prominent members of the Labour Party left the Labour Party in 1981 to form the SDP. and I joined it then pretty much. I'm that old. But we're a party of the traditional economic left. I mean, I think we support public utilities in public ownership. We want a nationalized railway system. We want to deal with the housing crisis by the state getting back in the business of building houses at scale. It's the one thing that people on the economic right just are blind to, is that, I mean, the state used to outbuild the private sector. The last year that happened was 1971, but it was normal. I mean, post-war, actually, there was a consensus among the two big parties that this was sensible, and slowly but surely that was degenerated, particularly in the 80s under Thatcher. And you now have a housing crisis, and so it shouldn't be a surprise really if you destroy the state sector in housing, you might end up with a housing crisis. You combine that with very, very high levels of immigration, it's sort of insane levels of immigration, and you will have a housing crisis. That's what's happened. So we would argue that the sort of bread and butter things on the economic left are basic, things that the SDP has always believed in. Funnily enough, the Labour Party now doesn't argue for these things, which is curious. I mean, public ownership of natural monopolies like water has very, very high public support. 65% of the public support that, and yet the Labour Party is going in a different direction, which is odd. It leaves a big area for us to go at. So yeah, I don't think there's anything controversial. We are very, very pro-market for the normal, goods and services that the country needs. The market is better at providing those. So that's for normal commerce and enterprise to do with the state's help. So you have this idea of a social market. The bits that the state should do, it should do and roll its sleeves up and do well. But the market is responsible for general industry, and I think that's very sensible. So I don't think that any of that's particularly controversial. The sort of social side is I was, people say it's right wing. I always slightly reject that because it never was. I mean, Clement Attlee and Hugh Gaitskell and Ernie Bevin weren't right wing, but they supported the family. They were very keen on the nation state convening solidarity to share. That's just where we are. I mean, it's more sort of traditional Labour views, I suppose. People think it's old-fashioned. I just think it's in correspondence with reality, I think.
No, I agree. And the Overton window has moved so far left that anybody now on the left who supports the family or supports their country or is patriotic is seen as far right.
Yeah, it's absurd.
It's absolutely crazy. You mentioned Labour there, so let's get into Labour. So you class yourself as a left-wing party, so therefore you must be like Labour. So what's the difference between you and Labour?
Well, the difference in the past is, I mean, my political heroes are Peter Shaw and David Owen, really. I have other heroes on the left as well, but they're the main ones. I think the difference is that the modern Labour Party isn't really a patriotic party in any sense. It's just another liberal party. I think the terrible thing for the voter is that you've got a choice of these big three parties, well, big four if you include the Greens, of the green liberals, the yellow liberals, the blue liberals, or the red liberals, and that's the problem. I mean, Starmer epitomizes this. I mean, he's got a party that's chock-a-block full of social liberals. Their preoccupation, they never talk about industry, Nick. I mean, you're talking from Manchester. The foundation of family life was the industrial job. In the 60s and 70s, you could raise a family on 40 hours of an industrial wage. You can't do that now. And all these economic liberals, they've carted off all our jobs to China, haven't batted an eyelid. They're not bothered about that, not bothered about what it does to, places that are described as the Rust Belt. It destroys them. And Labour has been absent in, I mean, I'd expect the Tories to be indifferent to that because that's their policy, but Labour hasn't been very good on that either. So I think the things that are inside their heads are, largely sort of, progressive woke ideas, diversity, inclusion, equality, or equity rather, and then just not focused on the bread and butter. Most people want a decent job and a decent house and a chance to raise a family.
Yeah, so let me throw a couple of topics at you that obviously Labour will have a policy on. Education. Where's Labour messing up on state education?
Oh, that's a huge topic. I mean, one of the biggest issues in education isn't so much structure but culture. You've got, people refer to it as the blob, the progressive blob. Culturally, I get parents coming to me and saying, William, I'm not comfortable with my 5-year-old, 6-year-old daughter going to school and being encouraged to think she isn't a girl. I'd say I totally agree with you. I mean, I think these are part of the problem. This is part of the problem. In terms of structure, I think the biggest problem in education is the overexpansion of the university sector, frankly, which is built. I mean, you see this in Manchester as well. You've got plenty of universities and thousands of students. But remember, Nick, that is built substantially on debt. I mean, the universities only have 3 sources of income. They have foreign student income, which is genuine income. But that can come at a price because a lot of the foreign students are just buying UK nationality effectively. And then the other 2 are government support, which is, I mean, you've got a borrowing requirement of 80 billion this year at least. So that's debt. And the third one, the big one, is student debt itself. I mean, students are coming out with 50,000 average debt. It's like a sort of drag anchor on their future. And most of it will never be repaid, so it's basically a Ponzi scheme. And doesn't matter where you look, Nick. You could look in, Newcastle, Sheffield, Leeds, Manchester. These are previously industrial cities which survived on production, and now they're based on debt. I mean, it's just you can't go on like this. So I think that's a major issue in education. I mean, apart from again on the cultural side, universities are basically like woke factories. I mean, particularly in the social sciences, a lot of the degrees they're doing are not worthwhile. What would the SDP do? We'd slim that down and we'd address the skills gap, give people training in vocational skills, trades, and deal with the skills gap. Because the model that the Tories have had for 20, 30 years is don't train any British people, just rely on imported labour. And the effect of that is to suppress wage rates and disencourage training. Again, Labour's been useless on it because they're liberals. They didn't stick up for the British working class in this. They were too keen on the European Union doing all the heavy lifting for them.
Yeah. I've been telling kids now for nearly 20 years, don't go to university. Unless you want to be a doctor or a solicitor, something where you have to have a degree, don't go to university because it's going to be a complete waste of time. I employ lots of people. I have done now for 10 years. I'm always sat in interview panels looking at CVs. And I've got to a stage now, the last 10 years, I don't even look at qualifications anymore now. And I definitely don't look at degrees. And one of my senior managers has a first class degree from Liverpool University. And she's extremely proud of that, and so she should. But she was so disheartened when we gave her the job. And she said, was it my degree? And I went, didn't care about your degree, because I've learned now someone with a degree tells you nothing about that person. Doesn't even mean you can write and spell anymore, because they become worthless because far too many people are going to university. And because they get a degree, they then suddenly think they're more intelligent than they are. Because 40, 50 years ago, you had a degree. It meant you were intelligent. Doesn't mean the same anymore. And the debt is appalling. And you're right, it is a Ponzi scheme. We're selling kids a dream that'll never come true. Go to university for 3-4 years, build up 50 grand's worth of debt, and you're going to get such a good job at the end of it.
Well, there are, and the structure of the economy is you can't have 50% of all jobs paying, the sort of good life executive pay. It just doesn't work like that. So a lot of people are going to end up with a debt and then back office jobs, earning 20, 22 grand, and they won't get out of that debt. No, it's a crazy system. We need to address it. I think another point you make about degrees is just the over credentialization of many sectors. Nurses having to have degrees, police officers having to have degrees. This is absurd. What you want, particularly in the public sector, is a chance for anyone at all who starts in a local authority sweeping the streets to become chief executive, or what we would prefer, town clerk. There shouldn't be barriers to people gaining progression in an organization because you haven't got a bit of paper from this university or that.
I think part of it is universities are now being used as a weeding out process. So we get the people we can control who'll be already indoctrinated, who'll be already used to following woke rules. And when we get them, half the work's already been done. We don't want people who are independent thinkers anymore now because they're seen as troublemakers and trouble causers.
But the one place, Nick, the one place that should defend freedom of thought and inquiry and so on is the university, but unfortunately it doesn't. I mean, it really, people aren't being trained properly to question things and to challenge orthodoxies. They go to university and they're just given a whole series of ideas to accept, and I think that's a major failing.
Yep. Let's get into crime. So where are you different from Labour on crime and disorder?
I don't. I mean, personally, I don't think. I think the basic problem is we're unaccustomed now to accepting the need for incarceration and punishment. I think that's a problem. The public is sick to death of hearing about people on early release going out, assaulting people or even murdering people. So I think we've got a prison population of what, 75,000. If in relation to the amount of crime that's going on, you need more prison space, we'd be in support of that. I think that's fine. I think Michael Howard was actually right that prison works in the sense that for the time that a criminal is behind bars, that person can't harm innocent people. I think there's also a cultural problem because so many, particularly Labour MPs, will instinctively be on the side of the criminal and again, not on the side of the victim. So there was a joke a few years ago. I think one of the sociologists said, there's a couple of sociologists walking down a road, and they see a man beaten and bloodied in the ditch, and one sociologist says to the other, "We must find the person that did this and help them." And that's the attitude. Unfortunately, that's the attitude. I think people like Corbyn have that attitude. They don't grasp that public protection is the main point.
And all this has come out of victimhood mentality. So what happened over decades was we started looking at criminals as victims themselves, because humans are obviously born perfect. So if then they deviate into crime, it must be society's fault. So we've let them down, or we made their life so hard they turn to criminality. And that is the philosophy they seem to have bought into, that these criminals are also victims. That's a complete load of rubbish.
Yeah, you're just showing common sense there, Nick. I mean, you're quite right. It goes back to sort of the blank slate philosophy of Rousseau. You read Rousseau. I mean, you should read it, but you might get mad. You might get mad in the process. Most people realize that, if you're a bad one, the society needs to sort you out, and society needs to be robust enough to do it. Again, you spoke at length about the BLM moment in 2020. I don't want to see the Metropolitan Police getting on their knees in front of a crowd. No, you're showing. My grandfather was a police officer in Liverpool, served for 35 years. He was hospitalized twice. I learnt a lot from him, and most of it was basic common sense about how to keep order. And I think we've lost that. I'm very concerned about that culturally. So yeah, as always, a lot of these things are cultural rather than economic.
What happened with the police, again, so many decades ago, was we had a change from calling them a police force to a police service. And what that was meant, and I bought into this for a little while, because I used to work for the council and the police, and I bought into this for many years. And what the politicians never really understood is it doesn't matter what you call the police, law-abiding citizens will support them no matter what, and will give them information, will pass intelligence over. It doesn't matter what you call them. It doesn't matter if those police officers are skateboarding with you down the street, or playing basketball with you, or doing absolutely nothing and just arresting criminals. Most people will support that. But on the flip side, it doesn't matter what the police do, criminals will always hate them, because they are the police. So this trying to pink and fluffy up the police so they're more acceptable just does the complete opposite, because criminals will never support the police because they're the police.
Yeah, no, I think people ought to get real. It's like fast bowlers and batsmen. They don't really like each other very much. you know, and that's fine. I just think we've lost, like in so many other areas, we've sort of lost the plot a bit on this.
No, absolutely. So, as the SDP, you're a small political party in the UK. What problems do you face being a small party?
Well, size itself is a problem. You know, I'd always want more members and more resources, but we you know, if you get the foundations right, one of the things we have tried to do is to be very clear about what we believe in, and we published something called the New Declaration in 2008, which is 18, which is about that. And I would say, you know, have a read of it. If you agree with most of it, join us, and if you don't. So we were very careful to try and get that right, and I don't think many. I'm not just saying this, I don't think many other political parties are as clear about what they're for. You know, we're for industry, we're for family. A lot of the things that we argue for are slightly countercultural now. I mean, just a topical one today. Yesterday, Liz Truss announced that there wasn't going to be a US trade deal. And everyone says, oh, that's terrible. No, I don't want one. We've got a large trade surplus with the United States now. And you mess around with that at your peril. We're not we've had enough of, you know, the sort of free trade liberal approach, getting rid of our jobs and just being totally indifferent to what is made where and by whom, even if it's slavery. We're against that. So, you know, I think we've thought things through. I think we're slowly, you know, gradually convening a good constituency. All of the metrics. I mean, one thing I would say about leading a smaller political party is that I'd be concerned if things weren't progressing, but they always do. Every quarter, every year, we get better results. We had a major win in Leeds City Council. You know, Wayne Dixon won at Middleton. Now that was typical SDP. It took, I said at the time, it was an overnight success. Took 4 years of work. You know, this is just hard work. But when we won, when the public really got to know us there, and that's, you know, about 33,000 people in Leeds now have an excellent SDP councillor who you could build the civilization on what Wayne's doing. You know, so it's a major victory. When it happened, we got more votes than all the other parties put together. It was massive. So,
I didn't know that bit.
Yeah, you know, and this was, I mean, when we started, Labour, I think when Wayne first tackled that seat, it was 2017, we got 500 votes. They had 3,500. Most people would have given up at that point and said it can't be done. Then we just narrowed it, and then when we won, we beat them, literally beat, you know, Labour, Tories, Greens, Lib Dems put together. So an excellent victory, and it just is hard work. You know, you've just got to put the time in. One of the things that you do have as a smaller party, though, is you have a lot of freedom, because the big parties, what the main participants and politicians in Labour, and they're very fettered. They're terrified of speaking the truth. And there's nothing stops us. We will just say it as we see it.
And you're right about the big parties, because they're trying to hold so many factions together. Tories, Labour, Lib Dems, all of them have got so many factions. They're scared of saying something in case it upsets this faction, who then attack that faction, and they end up saying nothing. And that's where we get this political speak from, a way of answering a question that doesn't really say anything, so you can't really offend somebody. And you did the opposite a minute ago. You said, go on the website, read our declaration. If you like it, join us. If you don't, don't. I've never heard a politician say that before, actually saying, don't join us.
Oh, no, well, I mean, if you don't agree with that, I don't want you. And also, and if you don't agree with our policies, don't vote for us. I mean, you know, for instance, we have policies on housing and industry and things, but we also have policy on the migration crisis. We've got a solution to it, which will work. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's harsh or whatever, you know, but it's not. It's just sensible. And most people...
I would like to hear that.
Well, that's basically, you know, you've got to stop the channel flow. As soon, if you allow people to come into your country and stay via this illegal route, you will have any number of people. I mean, you know, you had 27,000 last year, you could have 40,000 this year. The incentives are wrong. You have to... yeah, I think all the ideas of pushbacks in the channel are wrong. I don't think you can do that. I think you can, as soon as they arrive, you've got to process them overseas on a British overseas territory, and there has to be zero chance that any of those people can gain access to the UK and settle here. Zero, absolutely zero. If you had that, I promise you, Nick, people wouldn't spend €5,000 on a cross-channel. It would just stop it overnight. You'd build the facility in Ascension Island or whatever, but it would never be used. You get maybe a few hundred people, then it would stop. But the problem is that the politicians lack the will to do this. Now, the people that say, well, that's too harsh or whatever, I said, don't vote for us if you don't want a solution. Don't vote for us, vote for someone else.
No, I think, didn't Margaret Thatcher say that when she leaves politics, she's going to set up a company and it's going to be called Rent a Spine? Because she was sick of all her cabinet colleagues and other politicians not having a spine. And the way I describe our channel crossing problem, the illegal crossing, is it's like a TV game show. We've said to the whole world, if you can get here, you win the jackpot. We're going to put some barriers in your way. You've got to get across Europe. You've got to find a smuggler. You've got to pay money. You've got to get across the channel. And with all these little barriers, but along the way, we'll be cheering you. And when you get there, you've won. You've won the jackpot. You've won the game.
You've got something that you haven't paid for, though. That's the problem. I mean, and again, politicians on the left used to understand this. Harold Wilson, Peter Shaw would talk about the social wage. What do you get if you're a British citizen? You get education, you get housing, you get health support. You're with us. This is it. Now, if you're in a country like France, which is not an unsafe country, it's a civilized country, there can be no case of any asylum seeker from France. That's it, flat. I made a film earlier on the year called 10 Truths About the Migrant Crisis on the SDP's channel on YouTube. Have a look. And it just busts 10 myths about it. You cannot be you can't be a legal asylum seeker from France. It's impossible.
Again, all comes down to backbone. And that's what we're missing in our political class at the moment, is a backbone. And part of that is it's always short-termism. Most politicians are always thinking about their next election because they want to be voted in again. No one's ever thinking, and that's how we've got into our energy crisis. No one's ever thinking the long term. No one's ever thinking, I'll do the tough things now and take some stick because I love my country. And it might cost me my job at the next election, but I don't care because I know I'm leaving my country in a better position than when I found it. They're the sort of people we need in politics.
Totally agree. I mean, Nick, if you'd let me, I just want to say a few things about the energy crisis, because that is the biggest thing. I mean, the proximate cause, you could say, is this insane war that Russia is fighting. That's possibly the proximate cause. But leave that aside, the lack of preparation is down to this anti-planning, anti-long-term thinking crisis in British politics, and not just the political parties, the way we think generally. And you know, the failure to invest in nuclear energy, and Nick Clegg, you know, that clip of him 10 or 12 years ago saying, well, it'll take 10 years. Well, of course it will. I mean, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. But look at the figures. Look how much it's cost us. I just want to go through, it sounds boring, but go through the figures. The subsidies, rightly, I mean, you need the government's right to help households in this crisis, but the bailout's going to cost 150 billion to households, probably cost another 50 billion for firms, and you don't know how long it's going to go on for. That's just the next two years in the case of houses, or 6 months with firms. Now that's 200 billion. What could you have done if you insensibly invested that? Well, I'll tell you. Sizewell C is projected to cost 22 billion. That's 6% of the UK's electricity needs. Hinkley C is a bit more. That's about 28 billion. That's 6% as well. Now, the Rolls-Royce smaller modular reactors are even cheaper, or they don't provide as much energy. You need more of them. But basically, the nuts and bolts of it, this subsidy, you're not getting anything for it. You're just stopping the economy crashing. If you'd invested that 10, 12 years ago, you could have produced 60% of our energy, our electricity needs from that. But they are so blinkered, they refuse to do it. And it is a scandal.
And all that 60% of all that money, of all those billions, is leaving the country because we're importing all our energy. So it's not even like we're getting any benefit of this extra debt. It's all going abroad.
Now, it's so bad. And not only that, Nick, another thing that the SDP has campaigned consistently on, there's a wrongness in the way these people think. The Tories, actually, the coalition government, it was Francis Maude that closed down British nuclear fuels. That shows the ambition. And literally 5 years after they did that, Cameron was buying a pint for Xi and saying, would you like to come and build us a nuclear power station? That is, you've got to, I have said before, it sounds terrible, you've got to hate the country to do that. Why would they do that? Why would they go to the Electricity de France as well? Why would you subcontract an industry that you were pioneers in the 50s and 60s to the French and the Chinese? It's absolutely insane, and they should be ashamed of themselves. And it's exactly the same attitude on the railways. They are, the franchises are largely run by Trenitalia or SNCF or the Dutch railways or the German railways with Deutsche Bahn. This Tory government that we've had, it's not that they think that railways can't be run by the state. They just want it run by other states. I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful in my view. They've got no pride, absolutely no pride.
Again, short-termism. We're only looking at the next election, because the world at the moment, Cameron was saying the Chinese are our friends, Putin's our friend, so let's buy energy off Saudi Arabia, who could fall any day. Putin, who could fall any day. China, where they're going to end up having a war with China, probably in our lifetime. But 10, 12 years ago, we were saying all these people are lovely, because they don't realise or they don't care. In so many years' time, things change.
They do. I mean, it's actually dangerous. But I'm actually on this. I'm just talking about the lack of national pride in convening. What do you think we're so incapable of running these things and doing these things ourselves? I reject that. I think we're governed by people that don't care. And we put out an economics green paper last year called The End of Indifference, because I think all of this is just complete indifference. They don't care. We're educated over the last sort of 30, 40 years of liberalism to think it really doesn't matter where anything, who does what, and anything goes. And I'm afraid we've paid a high price for that.
So, William, we've got a general election in the next 2 years. It could be sooner, but I very much doubt it. They're going to want every day they've got this new Tory government to try to fix all the mistakes they've made. But let's be honest, try to make it look like they've corrected the mistakes that have been made. So what are your plans for the next general election?
Well, first, I agree with you. No one knows, do they? But I think it's very unlikely that you get an election next year. I think 2024 is probably the landing spot, probably earliest Easter and then summer. So we'll wait and see. But actually, it can go to 2025, actually, January. Not many people know this.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, legally, January 2025 is an option, but I don't think it'll get there. But so, no, I mean, we're working very hard on this now. So it's an important benchmark for the SDP, any political party, general election. Now, in the 80s, obviously, we got, millions of votes as part of effectively the third force in British politics. And it's quite a different situation now. In 2015, we had 6 candidates, and then, in 2017, we had 6 candidates, and then in 2019, at very short notice, we put 20 together. So what I'm after is 3 figures. I think that's a reasonable aim for a party our size. Certainly, we'll have candidates in every single region in the country, and there's some areas, in particularly Yorkshire and London, where we're quite strong. We might have many candidates. So that's what we're doing. It's not going to be easy, but again, you can't. What you can't do. I mean, a point I always raise is that there never has been in British political history a case of a party coming from nowhere. I mean, I suppose the SDP started at the top in the 80s and then actually worked its way down. But all throughout political history, the Labour Committee at turn of the century, 1900, formed a government in the 30s. Again, the post-war Liberal Party that was built up by Joe Grimond basically took 20 years to get to national prominence again. Green Party is interesting, which is a model not for their policies, but for what they built. Ecology Party in the 70s turned themselves into the Green Party, and by the late 80s, everyone knew the Green Party was there. UKIP was a single issue party. It was a little bit different. It's a lot easier to convene around a single issue. In terms of, you convene your support much more quickly. The downside of that is that your ceiling's quite low. So UKIP got nearly 4 million votes and got 1 MP out of it. And one of the reasons for that, about half the public wouldn't vote for UKIP. And what we're trying to do is actually the opposite. It's to convene a broad spectrum of sensible people and a majority. That's what we're after. So it's a harder thing, but it will take time. I don't think it needs to take 20 years nowadays. I think 10 or 15 years, but we're in for the long haul, and that's what we'll do. So I've no doubt at all next election will be a substantial improvement on what we did in 2019.
I really, really hope so. I love you guys. I like what you stand for. I like the way you go about business, and I'd like to see you taking more and more traditional Labour voters away from that lunatic party, because you are what old Labour used to represent. You're representing the people, the working people. You're sticking up for the country. You're patriotic, and that's desperately what we need. We need some opposition.
Well, that's right. I mean, people, I mean, again, when people find out about us, you know, Dave Bettany stood in the South Yorkshire mayoral and he got around, and honestly, people love him. And, you know, we made it's stages and stages, but we contested the London mayoral and got under 1%. And we pushed our vote in Rotherham, Barnsley, Doncaster to over 5%. I mean, for us, that's very good. You know, some big parties might think, okay, well, what's that? But that is another sort of major sort of benchmark for us. He'll just keep on going. I mean, you know, in South Yorkshire, as soon as if you did a blind test, we'd win the elections now, because that's where our values are. And it's just you've just got to keep on plugging away.
And that's what Yorkshire is: common sense Labour voters. And when I think of Yorkshire, the Red Rose, that's what I think of. People fighting for a better tomorrow.
Yeah, and you've got to give people the opportunity. I mean, one of the other principles is you've got to build it. Nigel Farage said this. I don't agree with everything he says, but he said you've got to build it before they use it, and that's true. You've got to put in the hard yards. People get to know about it a little bit, and then eventually the time will come and they say, I'm going to hop on this train. I'm going to use that and vote for the SDP.
And I hope people do. My final question is, you've got a party conference coming up in Manchester, which, thank you for the invitation, I'll be attending. Can you tell us a bit about that, and how can people attend that if they want to? Over to you.
Well, we have one major conference every year, and we've settled now on this oscillation between London and Manchester, northwest and southeast. It's about right for us. So we'll be at Manchester Central, which is the best venue. Not in the main hall yet, as Labour and the Tories are, but we've got a great pitch there. And it's basically in the morning, it's just policy motions and party business. But in the afternoon, we've got a wonderful selection of speakers. I do my keynote speech then. We've got Emma Webb, Tajin Gill, we've got Peter Whittle, we've got a panel which has Rod Liddle and Patrick O'Flynn. We've got Joanna Williams speaking, and the headline is that we've got John Cleese. So I was delighted because he supported the SDP in the 80s, and I got in touch with him, and he's speaking. He'll be the final speaker on that day, a legend, John Cleese. It is for party. I mean, I can invite people who are friends like you, but it is actually for party members. But it's not. You could always join the party. There is time, and it's only 20 quid for the conference. So there you go.
And that's what people should do then. So the conference is a week on Saturday?
The 8th of October.
8th of October. So if people go to your website now and join the party, they can then buy a ticket for the conference.
Exactly. They can do that and come along. Yeah.
Right, and it's worth doing all that to meet John Cleese and hear John Cleese speak, who's a comedy legend, and I'm glad that he's speaking out on some of these woke cultural matters, because a lot of the stuff he used to do, his comedy, couldn't be done now.
No, and so much of his comedy was prescient. You know, the Life of Brian sketch with Loretta and all the rest of it. It is absolutely prescient.
That's all just that reminds me now of He's Got a Crystal Ball. I mean, The Life of Brian, some of the sketches in there, you could watch it now and think, have they wrote that today? Because it just seems to have come true.
I know. Well, the sad thing is that wouldn't get made now. But the nice thing is we've got the film. We can always watch it.
Yeah. I've watched quite a few of their films, and things like Fawlty Towers was just hilarious at the time. Still hilarious now, but as a kid growing up on a Sunday evening, having a bath, my mum drying my hair, watching Fawlty Towers is one of my main memories of a Sunday evening.
No, it's incredible. Very lucky to have him.
No, absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to coming along a week on Saturday. 2 weeks on Saturday.
2 weeks on Saturday.
Yeah, 2 weeks on Saturday. So if you're interested in the SDP and your old-fashioned Labour, get on the website, have a look, see if you agree with what they stand for. If you do, join, and then get a ticket to the conference. That would be my advice. Thank you, William, for coming along. Anybody who's interested, I'll put all the details in the description of this video, and then you can make it easier for you to find all the links. Again, thanks, William, for coming along to Nick Talks. Hopefully, we can talk again in a few months and see how things are going. I wish your conference all the best, and I'll see you on the day. And thank you very much.
Cheers, Nick. Thanks a lot. See you then.
Thank you. Bye-bye.